Hello, today is Friday, August 1st. Welcome to episode 483 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaping up America. I'm NSI Deputy Executive Director Martha Miller, and I'm joined today by NSI Advisory Board Member Lester Munson and Senior Fellow Bishop Garrison. This week, the United States and the European Union reached a significant but somewhat controversial trade agreement, narrowly sidestepping what many feared would become major escalation in tariffs. Announced in Scotland, President Trump and Ursula von der Leyen established a deal which has a 15% tariff on most EU imports, and which is a marked increase from historical norms, but well below the 30% increase that the Trump administration had originally threatened. Brussels is committed to substantial American energy purchases, pledged new investments, both of which reflect ongoing economic ties and evolving strategic priorities. While the arrangement has brought a measure of relief and predictability after weeks of intense negotiations and public uncertainty, it leaves some important questions unresolved. Key sectors like steel and aluminum remain subject to elevated tariffs, and both U.S. and EU officials acknowledge that further dialogue will be needed on digital regulations, ag, and enforcement of investment promises. Critics on both sides characterize the deal as a political compromise with open-ended commitments, while supporters point to the value of stability and continued engagement. So, Bishop, let's start with you. What are the short-term versus long-term consequences of these tariffs for American consumers and businesses?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'd say, too, that the first thing we need to recognize in the short term that this is a victory for the Trump administration, just right off the bat. Like, you're bringing in more billions, really, of funding into the coffers based off of some of these arrangements. However, at the end of the day, as we all know, you've seen it from the Budget Lab at Yale, the Heritage Foundation sees this, Harvard Kennedy School. A tariff is a regressive tax, meaning that it's going to disproportionately affect lower income households. So even though we're seeing this in maybe the first 3 months to 6 months of these types of arrangements, when you look at the mid to long term, talking beyond 6 months, a year into the next year as well, you're going to see prices increase. Luckily, we had one of the strongest economies in the history of the world over the past a few administrations, from Obama to Trump 1 to Biden. And I know we had COVID in the middle of that, and that threw things off quite a bit. But we were able to rebound and recover, and businesses did very well. They made record profits. Right now, they're willing and able to dip into some of those previous profits, some of the savings that they were able to accumulate during that time. But that's not going to last. At some point, you're going to see them increase prices. And that those increased prices due to tariffs are going to affect the consumers. And most of those consumers it will affect are the lower income households. So that's why we need to not look through this through kind of rose tinted glasses and really understand what the long term implications and impacts are going to be.
So, Lester, Bishop talked about American businesses. What are your thoughts about how does raising tariffs actually impact the competitiveness of American businesses? Like, does it offer support, or does it ultimately weaken the U.S. economy and global trade?
Let me react to something Bishop said first, and then I'll answer your question, Martha. I totally agree with Bishop. This is gonna hit lower income Americans harder than upper income Americans. It's a good thing the One Big Beautiful Bill passed, because that was actually a tax cut for all Americans. And so while the tariffs are going to increase costs for people, it's somewhat mitigated by the One Big Beautiful Bill. I knew you weren't going to like that. To the competitiveness point, fault line. We've established a fault line. That's what we're here for. On the competitiveness point, in the long run, erecting barriers to the U.S. market makes our companies weaker because they're not going to be able to compete against they're not going to be able to compete against foreign companies who are going to have a tougher job. Foreign companies will thrive in a more difficult environment. Our companies will be in an easier environment. In the long run, that makes them weaker. It's not going to happen right away. It's not probably going to happen in the next 3 years, but it will happen if this kind of thing continues. This deal, a couple of the thoughts on this deal, to the extent it's reducing tariffs in the EU for US products, that's very good. To the extent it's increasing tariffs on foreign products that Americans want to buy, I think that's bad. And some of these promises on European investment in the United States, I think, are just promises. I don't know of an enforcement mechanism if they don't meet those goals. And the goals themselves look like they're big on paper, but in fact, I think are rather modest. I'll make one other point on the deal here, which is it's not a traditional trade deal. This is essentially an agreement between President Trump and the leaders of the European Union on temporary arrangements. There's nothing approved by Congress here. There's no formal trade agreement. A real trade agreement would be approved by both the House and the Senate and would change U.S. law and would be set in stone for a while and is something people can plan around. This is a temporary arrangement at best. So while, yes, it is a win politically for President Trump, in the long run, I don't really think this is a great way to do things.
So, so what are the prospects for resolving, getting back to the unresolved issues? What are the prospects for resolving these remaining points of contention between the EU and the United States? Regulatory digital regulations is a huge piece. Ag, aluminum and steel. Bishop, do you have any thoughts on where that might end up?
I mean, I actually think the Trump administration has somewhat of an opportunity here on these other pieces. It demonstrates that the EU is at least willing to broker some major deals, to have some level of concessions, and find a path towards collaboration. You got to come back to the table and actually do the work. Meaning, like, you have to have some a thoughtful approach to your policies. It can't just all be about cutting taxes. You have to look for opportunities to put in smart regulations, particularly as we look at the tech sector and what the EU and other nations across the world are worried about in terms of AI regulation and governance. You're going to have to start looking internally at some of our own domestic policies in order to be able to meet them in the middle in terms of some of these regulations that are going to be necessary in these industries. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here, but you got to do the work.
Lester, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think I'm close to where Bishop is, except I'm not as optimistic this is going to lead anywhere. The Europeans are over-regulated on both tech and ag, and that's to our detriment. And if you were really doing a long-term trade deal that benefits the United States with the European Union, you would address these structural problems in the EU. One of the reasons the UK left the EU was because of overregulation. I'm not saying that was the best thing to do in the grand scheme of things, but the overregulation inside the EU was driving the UK out. It is the real problem in the relationship. At the end of the day, they have a different idea about how to support high tech and promote those industries. They're very neuralgic on some of these food products. They've got really particular weird concerns that I don't think are scientifically based. And what we really need is a long-term way to address those things. That's actually going to help the U.S. economy more than anything else.
Yeah, and if I could add one thought, I don't necessarily disagree with Les on those points. I think in many instances they are potentially overregulated. I think in many instances right now we're seeing it more and more. We're becoming way underregulated. So I think just moving the needle a bit more to the middle for the United States is going to be important. There you go.
Well, I think we have some fault lines, but we do have a consensus that the EU is overregulated. This deal did not actually deal with some major long-term differences. It will have negative long-term effects, even if the short-term, with its predictability, will be helpful. So on that note, that's a wrap. Thanks, as always, to Taylor Lane, Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for the help producing today's episode. Join us Monday, August 4th for another episode of Fault Lines, NSI's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. And Fault Lines is on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.